A little bit more about some of the practical things associated with sending people out in church planting ministry. I will make this comment that much of what I am going to share with you in the next session and two are methods, if you will, ways of sending and ways of starting churches that we have been involved with for about 35 years, this type of a church planting scenario. And I think some of the practical things that we will share will be of value to you if you are, number one, starting a church. Number two, if you are a church that is interested in having a church planting ministry. We talked about different styles and models of church planting in our last class. Today, in Lesson 9, we're looking at the sending process. The sending process. Every church should have a process that is clearly outlined for how they will enter into this thing called church planting. This is especially true if we want to try to avoid what we referred to last time as accidental church planting. Remember when we talked accidental church planting? That was when basically we have a church split. I think it's a great testimony. The church I came from in Portland, Oregon, City Bible Church, used to be called Bible Temple. That church is over 50 years old and has never had a split. And I think one of the reasons why it hasn't had a split is because it was pastored by leaders who believe in raising up ministries and releasing those ministries into some sort of area of function. But if you are a leader who is kind of jealous for the ministry and you can't release people, you can't really bring people to a level where they can go out and do the stuff, then you will in essence put a cap on the church. And people will know they can only go so far in that church. They can never get to higher levels of leadership. They can never go out and start their own church because you won't send them. You won't train them. You won't foster that development in them. And so they'll either do one of two things. Either they will go to a different church where they think that can happen, where they can be trained and released for ministry, or they will just take matters into their own hands. Well, I think three things can happen. One, they'll go to another church where they think it can happen. Number two, they will take matters into their own hands and just simply go start a church anyway and take a bunch of people with them, and everybody's disgruntled and complaining because nobody has a ministry or a place here. And the third option would be they just kind of forget about their vision and just sort of die and just blend in and really never accomplish. And so none of those scenarios are very good. And so it's very critical, I think, that if we are caring about people, we are raising up people, we need to have a place where we actually release people, where they can actually go and fulfill their ministry call. I mean, if Paul was never able to fulfill his ministry call because the church at Antioch would never send him, then how is that going to happen? How can they go unless they've been sent, the Bible says? Well, there is a sending process that we should look at. And I think it's important that whatever process you use, it's strategic. That is, you know why you're doing it. It's promoted. It's well known. People know if you want to plant a church, if you want to start a church, this is how you do it in our circle, in our world, in this church. There is a method. There is a way for that. All right, they might not be ready for that, but there should be some sort of definition that is brought to that so people can feel that there is hope for them. One of the scriptures that we like to use, if you're looking at point number 1 here, is there was a process for the sending in the book of Acts. A process for sending in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 13, verse 1 to 3. We've read this verse before, but we'll read it again right here in this context. Now in the church that was at Antioch, there were certain prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manahan, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. And as they ministered to the Lord and fasted, the Holy Spirit said, "Now separate me, Barnabas and Saul, for the work to which I have called them." Then having fasted and prayed, they laid hands on them and sent them away. There are a lot of things to observe in this passage. As you study the whole church at Antioch, you'll find that when the church in Antioch first started, it was started because there was a kind of a revival going on that had been kind of kindled by the fact that in earlier days there had been persecution at the Jerusalem church, and those people that were in the Jerusalem church were scattered, and many of them went to this place called Antioch where they witnessed and shared their faith. And so many people were coming to the Lord, but there was no real church for them to experience. And so one of the things that came to the mind in the Jerusalem church was this was going on, and so they chose to send Barnabas to go and be involved in this church, be involved in organizing the church into a real church. And they chose Barnabas for very good reasons. Evidently, that place in Antioch had a lot of people from Cyprus who were there, and Barnabas was actually a man who was originally from Cyprus, or had that kind of a background, and so he would be a logical choice. He was a leader in the Jerusalem church. He was well respected among the brethren, and they sent him to bring some order or organization to what was going on there, and maybe take it from just being a bunch of believers to an actual church. And the Bible tells us that when he got there, he saw the grace of God that was operating. He saw the things that were happening, but he also saw that the task was very big, and he knew he needed help, and so he sent for Paul to come and be with him. Paul was at that time living in Tarsus, which was his hometown, but he had been kind of sitting there for 10 years or so, doing not much of anything, and Barnabas knew they needed some teaching, they needed some grounding, and he could remember that Paul was a very good teacher of the Bible, and so he brought him down there to be with him. Well, at the time when they first landed there were no leaders in the church. There were no prophetic ministries in the church. In Acts chapter 11, when they did have prophetic ministry, it was because Agabus from Jerusalem came down there and prophesied. So Barnabas was sent out. We don't know exactly what his ministry is. We know he was a exhorter. We knew he was an encourager of people's ministries because of the life that he lived. He was well respected among the brethren. Probably more of a prophetic kind of a person. And then we have Paul, who was a teacher. And so they go there and they spend 2 to 3 years where they're really, really serious about the work that they're doing. And it's interesting, the result and the fruit of their work was, it says, now the church that was at Antioch, there were certain prophets and teachers. Well, where were they before? They didn't exist before. When Barnabas first went to Antioch, they had believers, but they had no ministries per se. They didn't have any prophets or teachers. Where did these prophets and teachers come from? Well, they obviously had ongoing training, and they were lifting these people into areas of ministry. And it's interesting because Paul was primarily a teacher, and Barnabas was probably leaned more for the prophetic ministry. And they raised up after their own kind. And so somehow when they taught, they were able to raise these ministries up to a place where they were able to give them responsibility and authority to the degree that they could make themselves out of a job. You know, they had a big job of grounding that church and setting a course for that church, but now their work was done. And so now they're in this context where, because Paul knows his call was bigger than just the Antioch church. There was more that God wanted him to do because he had prophetic words that happened over his life 12, 13 years earlier when he first got saved. But yet that was where he was in his stage of the journey, and he did everything he could to help raise that church along with Barnabas. And they did a great job, and now they'd raised up other leaders. And now it was time for the next leg of their journey, if you will. And in a context of prophetic moving of the Spirit and worship and so forth, prayer, the word came forth, now separate me, Barnabas and Saul, for the work to which I have called them. There were prophets there, so that's probably how the word came. Now is the time for that, and they, in a time of fasting and prayer, they laid hands on them and sent them away. Notice the various ingredients that are just here in this passage. The process seemed to involve 7 main steps for apostolic church planting. First of all, the call was received. We know that Barnabas, of course, got his call by coming to that city of Antioch. Paul had received a call through Ananias many, many years earlier. Then there was a time of proving of the call. Then letter C, there was a prophetic confirmation of the call. And then in this setting, there was the laying on of hands of the brethren. They laid hands on them. This is like an official identification with these guys. And there was prayer going on. There was prayer support. They sent them away. And then later on, as you follow this story through the book of Acts, they actually came back to that home church and then went out from there again later on. But you see this process. They received a call, time of proving of the call, prophetic confirmations of the call. There came a point now where the church the leaders lay hands on them, identify with them, send them out. In the context of prayer, the church is praying for them. They actually send them away, and then they come back at a later time. And I think it's obvious here that they had this idea that one of the reasons why we exist is to make more churches, is to have more churches exist. And so this whole idea of church planting here was a process that was in their mind. It was something that was noble. It was something that was honorable. It wasn't just somebody branching off or splitting off or Paul going and doing his own thing. Leadership was involved. The church was involved. There was identification involved with the people that were doing it. It was a big deal. It was a big deal. I think it's important that we make church planting in our churches a big deal. Because I think it's a big deal to God, and we need to make it a big deal to people, and we don't want to hide it in a corner somewhere like we're not proud of it. I think it's something that we want to believe in and foster. Now, there are certainly cautions and certainly guidelines that we need to have as we do that, but I think it should be part of our nature. Things reproduce after their kind. If you're a person and a believer, you should reproduce other believers. But if you're a church, you should reproduce other churches. And so I think it should be in the heart of every church. You may not say, well, I don't think we're that much of an apostolic church, but I think you should accept the fact that even though your church may not be doing that great right now, someday as God leads you and as your church grows and becomes stronger, there will come a day when you will be planting churches, just like the church in Antioch. Maybe not a lot, maybe just a few, but that will happen, because when leaders are raised up under you, they're going to be filled with vision. They're going to be filled with callings that's on their life, and part of our responsibility as leaders is to raise them up, train them, release them into the ministry to which God has called them. And that's part of the responsibility of leaders. When you look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11, it talks about the responsibility that's given to the fivefold ministry. And what are they to do? They're to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. They are to build up the body of Christ. And part of that is training people and releasing people into ministry. Now, from here on, Roman numeral 2, there should be a similar process in the local church today, just like there was in the book of Acts. Now, the process that I'm going to kind of go through here, I won't be able to give you chapter and verse for everything that's said in this next section, because this is just simply a map, a road map. This is a way in which we've done it over the years and found certain amount of success. Some people would say, well, that's too long, that's too drawn out. I'm not sure that it is, but there's a delicate balance between being too slow and being too fast. Sending out people before they're ready can also be a failure. But I think if many, many churches are doing this, you'll find that many new churches can be birthed very quickly. And I think over the years, we had at least one or two churches starting every year. And that might seem very slow, but you know what? If every church is doing that, it won't be slow at all. It will be very rapidly the process. Now, if you go back 3 pages in your notes, you'll find a little piece of paper that looks like this. It has the church planter's vision on it. And I just want to reference that for a minute before we actually start going through this, because the points that we are going to be making to a great extent come off of the thoughts that are on this piece of paper. But this is meant to be just a little way to visualize this process that moves from the reception of a vision to the implementation of a vision. And you'll see it goes through 5 circles. The vision reception, the vision definition, the vision preparation, the vision maturation, and then the vision implementation. And when it comes to vision reception, for instance, A person receiving a vision, that comes through prayer, it comes through Bible reading, it comes through various prophetic moments in a person's experience. And then from that we get a vision definition. What is the call? What is the place? What is the time? And then vision preparation. Okay, how do I prepare personally? How do I prepare academically with studies and so forth? How do I prepare in terms of some of the ministry experiences that I have? Then we have vision maturation, the waiting on God, the seasoning, the readying, when we were ready but we're not being sent out yet. And then finally vision implementation, the door opens, there's laying on hands, there's a sending forth that takes place. So this kind of helps us just to kind of visualize the overview of that process in a person's life. Now let's go back to our notes. Under Roman numeral 2, there should be a similar process in the local church today. Letter A, there's the receiving of direction from the Lord. That's the first circle on your little chart, the vision reception, receiving the vision. Under most circumstances, this is not the responsibility of the sending church. This is the responsibility of the individual. That is, what we're asking people to do is to seek the Lord about their own life, about their own future, about what God wants and has called them to do. And so it isn't a responsibility of the leadership team to pray about your life. Some people think that the leaders are supposed to do all of this, that they just kind of wander around in this heavenly cloud and put their hand on your shoulder and say, I think you're the one. I think you're supposed to go plant a church here. I think you're supposed to go here. I think you're supposed to go there. No, I don't think that's even reasonable, that especially in a growing church, a large church, that the leaders are going to know everything that's going on in your heart. And I think if we're kind of waiting for someone to tap us on the shoulder and say, thou art the man, and you should go do this, and you should go start a church there, I think we'll just sit there and wait for a long time. But I think we need to let people understand and know that this is a personal responsibility that they have before the Lord to get the initial direction. Yes, they're going to screen it through their leaders. Yes, they're going to talk to those in leadership about the whole thing, but it needs to be their heart, their vision. Now, there is an exception to that, and that is that sometimes a church that has a church planting mission and vision will have maybe among them certain ministries that they deem to be apostolic, who will start many churches or whatever, or they have an opportunity that comes their way, much like the Jerusalem church did. There was an opportunity, there was a group of disciples there, we need to send leadership over there. Who's the right person to send? Well, they didn't send a planting pastor, that is someone who was going to pastor that church forever. They sent an apostolic ministry in Barnabas, who would actually only be there for a season to solidify the church and make sure it was built in a solid way and it had leadership established in that church. So receiving the direction of the Lord, that's the responsibility of the person to pray, to read his Bible, to discern the prophetic moments in his life, to come to that place of understanding. The second part here is letter B, testing the direction from the Lord. And we talked about this earlier, how to test the call. And so that's when this process takes place, where I might receive something from the Lord and then I go through the testing process. Letter C is filtering the direction through an elder or church planting coordinator. Now, when a church is small, you won't necessarily have a church planting coordinator, but as the church grows and gets large, you might actually have a office that's dedicated for the purpose of church planting, or at least a person who's designated as the church planting coordinator, which we'll talk about more later. And what will happen is that elder or pastor or church planting coordinator will help you evaluate certain things relative to the particular call that you might be having in your life. And in relationship to your call, they're going to be asking you questions. What do you feel about your call? What do you feel about the place that God has called you? What do you feel about the time? And just kind of discerning where you're at to try to understand what's going on in your own heart. They will also then undoubtedly deal with things like the compatibility with the call. That is, are you really ready for this? Are you mature enough for this right now? And hopefully they'll be able to give you some very positive input. They'll talk to you about the fruit in your life right now. Sometimes we're looking for this thing over the wall, but we really aren't having that kind of fruit now. I know a lot of times when people have come to me and said, I really believe I'm supposed to start a church someday. I'll say, well, you know what? As I look at you now, and as I look at what you're doing now, and as I look at how you're involved in the church right now, I just don't see that happening because you're not doing those kinds of things here. I fully expect if somebody's going to plant a church out there, they will do what it takes to plant a church out there. They'll do that in the mother church before they do it out there. And that means that if when I go out there, it means I got to make disciples. It means I got to disciple people. It means I got to lead small groups and do their. Why aren't you doing that here? You should be doing that here. And when we start seeing more of that kind of fruit in your life here, we can feel a little bit more confident about sending you out in the future. So it's a time of evaluation and proving your fruit, proving your gifting and so forth, and making sure that you have your leadership team behind what it is that you're doing. So the filtering process takes place in relationship to those over you in the Lord. But remember, if you are a church that doesn't have an outlet for this, these kinds of discussions can't even take place because you're not planning on starting any churches. You're not planning on releasing anybody. You're not planning on sending anybody. So I think it's so critical that we have a vision to help people reach their destiny. In our vision and values class, I talked about the importance of seeing people and valuing people the way God does. And if God has entrusted you with people as pastors and leaders, then one of your responsibilities as pastors and leaders is to help them to achieve their goals, help them to arrive at their proper destiny. Yes, warn them when you feel like they're going astray. Warn them when you see obstacles or problems along the way. But at the same time, what can we do to nurture them into a place where those visions can be fulfilled? I think what a wonderful testimony it would be that the day comes. Yeah, we were never a large church. We were only a church of 100 or 200, but we started 40 or 50 churches throughout the life of the church. I mean, that would be pretty powerful because then you're not just a church of 200. You're a church of, 200 plus these 50 churches plus all the people that are in those churches. And really, the fruit of your ministry is much bigger than what you see just with your natural eye when people come together. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about the importance of not sending out too many people too fast because you can't kill the mother just to have babies, right? We want to keep everybody alive and flourishing. The next process is, and this is, like I say, this is just what we've used over the years, is completing the church planting questionnaire. Now, if you go back in your notes even further, you'll find what's called the church planting application questionnaire. And that's a rather long document. As you start leafing through that, you'll find that it's quite long. But when you sort of perceive that somebody is getting to the place where they might be actually ready to consider something like this, you can give them this questionnaire. And again, you can copy this, use this any way you want to. But what it forces people to do is think about things that they've never thought about. A lot of times when people say, I want to start a church, or I want to do this, they really don't even know what they're talking about. It just sounds like a good thing to say. I want to start a business. Well, go talk to somebody who just started one. I want to have a baby. Just go talk to somebody who just had one. Make sure you want to go through that. Well, the same is true of church planting. Sometimes people have this kind of grandiose idea about what it would be like to start a church, but they really don't have a clue. And what this questionnaire does, it helps them understand themselves a little bit better, a little bit about their own natural history, helps them to try to discern what their call is, and not just theirs. It deals with their spouse as well. How many know if you're married, you're going to go out as a team? You're going to do this as a team, and you both really need to be on the same page. It'd be a terrible thing if you tried to start a church and your spouse was your worst heckler. The spouse didn't like to go to church. They didn't want to come and be involved in the ministry. Well, that's obviously not a very good example. Then it will go on to ask questions about what's in their heart in regard to a church plant, what city, and what they know about the city, what are their goals in relationship to this, how they see the church going in various areas of church life, what their philosophies are about certain aspects of church life. And so it helps them to kind of think through the the process in more tangible ways than just, I want to start a church. What's that church going to look like? How is that going to happen? Financially, how is that going to happen? Have you thought about what that means? And certain areas like this. What do you know about children's ministry? What do you know about this? What do you know about youth ministry? What do you know about these things? And sometimes when we think, I want to start a church, we're not really thinking about the particulars, and it really forces them to do that. So we have them complete that and then turn that into whoever is going to be their counselor through the process, whether it's the senior pastor, an elder, or church planning coordinator. It doesn't matter, but somebody needs to look that over. And, counsel them on the way. Letter E, the next part is sharing the direction with the eldership at the appropriate time. So the person is kind of working with a pastor, a elder, a church planning coordinator, but at some point in time, the church planning coordinator or whoever is counseling this person realizes that this is probably a good vision, it's probably a direction they should be going. It's probably getting close to the time when we should think about them doing this, and then this would be a time to present this vision to the entire eldership, which is the group that will ultimately be making the decision of whether or not this thing takes place or not, because it's not just an individual planting a church, it's a church planting a church. And I really believe it's critical that the whole church be involved, and that starts from the eldership or leadership team. And so at this time, the person would come to the leadership team and they would explain the call. They would explain confirmations to the call. They would give a brief analysis of the situation, explain how they plan to begin, submit to the questioning of the leadership team, and they would present some sort of a document that would help explain. Now, Pastor James, who started this church, went through this very same process in Portland, Oregon, before this church here got started. And he went through this process about 10 plus years ago, because it was about, he went through the process of being a part of the church, being trained in the church, then believing that God was wanting him to come and plant a church in Africa. He thought it was going to be Zimbabwe, but he didn't realize that God brought Zimbabwe to this church. Because I think most of our people are from Zimbabwe, and so kind of worked that way. And then he got redirected to come to Johannesburg, but he went through that process, went to the elders. He had a document that I could show you today. I meant to bring it with me today, that he presented, to the elders, and went through his vision, went through what he believed God was saying to him, and the elders had a chance to look it over, discuss it, ask him questions about it, and go through the thing, and then strategize, okay, from here, where do we go? And I think it was probably a year and a half or more from that point that he was eventually sent out, and then going on, I think it's going to be 9 years this year. Yeah, 9 years this year, the church was started. And so he went through that very same process. But what you're doing is you got people around you who are helping you. They're helping you refine the vision, define the vision, so that when the time comes to go out, you can go out with great confidence. You can go out with great strength. You can go out. I'm not just doing this on my own. This is a church, planting a church in South Africa. So sharing the direction with the eldership is that step. Then letter F, setting the date for the sending. So you've met with the elders based on the evaluation of where you are, how much more training they may think you need or whatever. At some point in time, you're going to set an actual date for the sending. That may be very soon, or it may be down the road a piece, depending upon, again, the personal training and so forth that might have taken place up to this point. Then letter F, there's a sharing of direction with the congregation. Several months prior to the sending out, we would go to the entire church and announce the fact that so-and-so, we'll use Pastor James Monahan, is planning on starting a church in Johannesburg, South Africa. And this is something that we really want to get behind. The elders have approved this, and we are excited about it. And this is approximately the time frame when this is going to happen. And so we want you to start praying about it. We want you to start thinking about it. And one of the things we will say to the congregation is, if you feel like you are interested in being a part of this church plant, Of course, not too many people are going to move all the way across the world to be part of it. But if it's a closer church plant, they might. If you want to be a part of it, then please go talk to an elder, and there's a process then by which we would start to screen and talk to people who might want to be a part of that church plant. And there's another questionnaire that is right behind the other questionnaire that I showed you that is for a questionnaire for those that might want to be part of a team. It's a church planting team member application. So we can make sure that when we send out somebody, and if there's a team that goes with them, or there's people that go with them, or there's people that are going to be part of that, that we're sending out healers instead of, or physicians instead of patients. You know, what you don't need to do is send out a lot of people that are going to be a lot of problems for the new pastor when he starts a church. You want them to be able to be a help and a strength to that. So the congregation is informed. There's an opportunity to go along. That's announced. Those that are interested are encouraged to talk to their elder for screening. And those interested should fill out the team member questionnaire. Now again, I'm just reminding you, this may not be the way you do it. I'm just simply saying this is how we've done it over the years, and it seems to have worked very, very well. And again, it might seem like, well, that's a lot of detail there. But you know what? I find that the better prepared you are, the more you do at the front end, the less problems that you have to clean up later on. And we want to try to minimize that as much as possible. It's trying to make the mother very healthy before she has the baby. You know, one of the best things you can do for a baby is tend to the health of the mother while the baby is being formed in the womb. And because that's where the nutrition comes from. And sometimes women don't have the best vitamins going for them. They don't have the best things going for them, and it affects how that birth takes place. And so we want to make sure that this church mother is healthy, but also we want to make sure that the new baby is going to do the very, very best that it can by whatever preparation that we do. Now the next process, letter H, is preparing to be sent. All right, so we've got that taking place. What takes place? Well, there's a gathering, a team at home. What do we mean by that? Not in the home necessarily, but one of the things that takes place is that especially if there's people going. Now in Pastor James and Jenny's case, nobody went with them because that required moving to a new country, clear across the world, and all of that. When we've started churches over the years, we've started quite a number of them. We've had teams go as little as just a husband and wife, or we've had as many as 110, I think, in one case, went out as a team to start a new church. Well, that's a pretty good start, 110 people. How many think that's a pretty good start? I wish I had 110 people right now, you say. Well, I'm saying that's a pretty good start. But that was geographically much closer to the mother church, didn't require quite as much commitment, didn't require going to any new countries and things like that. And they were going with a very charismatic leader and so forth. So it just varies depending upon the situation. But if there are team members that are going to be going with them, one of the things that they do is while they're in this process, maybe a few months before they're ready to actually be sent, they start meeting as a team before they're actually sent out. That is, they start having their own gatherings, they start having their own services. And part of the purpose of this is for them to get used to each other, get to know each other, learn to function as a group, maybe work out and identify some potential problems. Because you know what? One of the things that people don't realize sometimes when they're going out with somebody who is starting a church is that now that person has got to be their pastor. That person has got to be their principal feeder. If you were part of this church and Pastor James was your principal feeder, and you're going out with somebody who doesn't have the strength of ministry that they do in terms of preaching the word and also maybe the maturity level to handle problems and so forth, you might be deceived in the fact that if that other person was the only one ministering into your life, it really wouldn't work for you. And so when you go out on a team, you've got to be able to accept that team leader or that new pastor as your pastor and be able to come under their leadership and come under their ministry. And so it's critical that they have this little proving ground while they're in-house. Also, sometimes potential problems, maybe clashes within members of the team. You don't want to do this when you're out starting a church. You don't want to do this when they're out in public, so by having them do this while they're still in the greenhouse, still in the hothouse, still inside the church before they're even sent, if you can solve all those problems and get that team working together very, very well before they leave, then obviously it can work out so much better. So they gather as a team at home. Number 2, they meet together with the eldership at regular elders meetings. One of the things we will have, once we identify that this person is going to be a church planter and they're going to be sent out from here, we find that a lot of the experiences that they can get just by being a volunteer in the church. But we also learned that one of the experiences that they don't have is what it's like to be a part of an eldership team, because maybe they weren't an elder, or maybe they were. If they were, then that's already done. But they're going out, they're going to start a church, they're going to raise up their own leadership team, but they might not know how that team functions or how do you work together as a team. And by having them sit with the leadership team during that season and be involved in leadership meetings, it helps them to see how you work as a team and how elders do the business that they do. And so they'll sit with, once they've been approved to go, then they'll start going to the leadership meetings. Number 3, then selecting 2 elders from the home church to work with you and serve as the initial board. One of the things we always had them do, our church had many elders, but what they need is somebody who is going to be specifically assigned or involved in their particular church plant from the mother church, so that there can be some level of accountability. When you send out a pastor and they don't have any elders in that first church, who is the authority? Who's the covering body? Well, it's the mother church, and one of the best ways to do that is to assign a couple of elders who actually take special interest in that church, so that the pastor can come here and he can say, the elders that I relate to are from the mother church, and these are their names, and this is who you can call if you think I'm doing something crazy. And so there's some accountability involved. They're still not an autonomous church on their own. They still don't have their own leadership team, and so they're still functioning under the direction of that mother church. Then the next thing would be to meet with key departmental leaders. We would have them go around to all of the departmental leaders. Hopefully these are people that they've already had some interaction with, just to make sure that they can't just pick their brain a little bit. What I find is that when now you're starting to go out and you're starting to say, you know what, we're going to have to do this. We're going to have a children's ministry. We're going to have this. Suddenly your questions become a lot more relevant, and you perk up a little bit more and you listen a little bit more carefully to what is being said, because of what you're just ready to do. So you might even meet with secretaries and see how they file things. You might meet with the music office to find out how you can get a hold of some good songs, and what are the laws relative to this or that or the other thing, and all of these different areas. So we try to create a checklist for them to go through so they can start taking care of some of these things. Another thing that's always good to have happen during that season of time, between the time when the church plant has been approved and the time when the person is actually sent out, is to have them actually preach in the service. So people who maybe don't know that ministry can actually see that ministry function, and part of that will help the prayer support. Part of that will help people's decision about whether they want to be a part of it or not. Part of it will just help put a face on this whole area of church planting. And then at some point in time you've scheduled the sending, and there should be an actual sending out service where officially the elders or the leaders of the church lay hands on them. There's prayer. An offering is taken for them. There's a reception afterwards where people can kind of talk to them and say goodbye to them, and at that point in time there'll be some sort of a licensing or ordination that will take place for that ministry. And then after they're sent out, there will be follow-up that will continue afterward, and that would include primarily would happen through those elders that had been designated to serve with them. And then we also encourage our pastors to become part of a pastors fellowship called Ministers Fellowship International, which also helps to give some ongoing input to their particular situation. All right, the last couple of points here. There are several advantages of the team method of church planting. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in the next session, so we won't go into a lot of detail here. But we've got mentioned here fellowship and companionship. It's very tough to go out to start a church by yourself. And it's very difficult because you don't have a lot of people trumpeting anything. There's nobody in your service. You don't have a service to bring them to. Evangelism is going to be a big part of it. There's nobody else there who even knows what songs you might want to sing. There's no musicians. It's just starting from that's zero. That is very difficult. Now that's how this church started, with just 2 people, James and Jenny Monahan, and it started with just 2 people who came here, didn't know anybody, never lived in this city before, and didn't live in this country before, and just to kind of come in and say, okay, now we're going to start a church. How do we do that? They were here for probably close to 6 months, 6 months before they ever had a service, because they just had to meet some people and try to get some people saved and that type of thing. And the very first service they had, I think it was on June 7th in the year 2000 in a hotel conference room, and they had a total of 6 people there, and I think only, and that's counting them, and so there was 4 people in the congregation, and only one of them was even saved. So that was the start. And you can imagine that it was slow, but you know what? That's a long time ago now, and God has blessed. But it is harder to do it that way, as opposed to another friend of mine who went out with 110 people, and from day one, when they finally went public, because they met before they were sent out, and before they actually started public services, I think the first service they had was 200 plus people. So, hey, that's pretty easy compared to, 4 people, and 2 of them aren't even Christians. So, yeah. But anyway, the team method of church planting is great. It helps to grow faster. Finances are stronger at first. People believe along the same lines. And so you've got at least a core group of people that are all with you, that you don't have to kind of start from scratch on everything. And then Roman numeral 4, there are a few cautions relative to the team method of church planting. Sometimes when people go out on a team, they have these very high expectations because they think they can get in on the ground level of something, and they weren't very important where they were, and they hope that they'll be really important when they go there. So they want to be a big fish in a little pond. And they were in a big pond before, but they weren't much. So they have these expectations. Well, I want to be an elder. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that. I'm going to be that. And it's really important that we tell people who go out with team members, never give promises about what you will be or what you will do or whatever. The whole idea was we're just all going out as servants, and we'll do whatever it takes to get the job done. And the other challenge is that the leader has to become eventually their pastor. If that doesn't happen, then the church plant is not going to work very well, because people will tire of their relationship with this new church, and then they'll want to go do something else, and they may leave a big hole when they end up leaving because of it, or they may even leave with a negative. And so you want to be very careful about who goes along with those particular church plants. Well, in our next class, we'll talk a little bit more about this seed church method, see where it comes from the scripture, and talk a little bit more about some of the practical things relative to it. So we'll go ahead and take our break right now, and we'll come back and finish this session later.